As you may have heard today, the Trump administration, the Department of Education, has laid off about half its staff, about 1,300 people. This will dramatically affect the department's operations, including federal student aid and programs for vulnerable students. This is how President Trump explains his action.
We want education to be moved back where the states run education, where the parents of the children will be running education, where governors that are doing a very good job will be running education.
But how might this federal cutback affect Bay Area schools? Joining us live to talk about this and other pressing issues facing California education, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. Superintendent Thurman, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Kristen, for having us on.
Before we get into that whole issue, I want to start with something you are deeply involved in. Earlier today, you held a news conference along with State Senator Jesse Arreguín from Berkeley to address the educator and housing shortage. Tell us about this bill you sponsored.
Yeah, thank you. Today we talked and launched SB 502 publicly. In short, the bill would help school districts to build affordable housing for teachers and school staff. We think that 125 school districts a year could get help. They could get enough money for the pre-development of that construction, and it could amount in maybe 100,000 more units every single year for educators and others in our workforce.
I understand you started work on this last year, right? Why is this so critically important?
Like many, school staff struggle with, not being able to afford to live near where they work. And that's a threat to our students' success. And until we can figure out how to pay our educators better, one thing we can do is to address the lack of affordable housing. And it turns out that in every county in the state, school districts have surplus property, 75,000 acres to be specific. And if they each put just a few housing units on that surplus property, we could get to 2 million housing units by the year 2030.
Wow. Okay. Let me ask you to put a little more meat on the bones there of what you outlined for us, making it easier for school districts to get funding for pre-development. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This helps schools assess the value of their surplus property. They can have architects and others who can help them determine how many units that they could build and the type of units that they need to build. And so this bill, if approved, would result in school districts getting anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 that they can use to conduct those studies, the feasibility of building, the number of units that they can build, what it would cost, things that schools don't normally do in-house. This gets them that extra technical assistance to get ready to build and to put out an RFP, put out a proposal to get bids from companies that will help them ultimately build the housing project.
Got it. So you're really talking more about the research part, the laying the groundwork part, and not really, getting the school districts into development, like becoming the developers themselves.
That's correct. Although the schools would ultimately become the developer, but they would need help from someone who is a developer and from architects to think it all through. The state's been giving money every single year, the low-income housing tax credit, $500 million. And, many educators qualify for that. And so schools need help figuring out the financing, where to build. Sometimes just having the property assessed for what its value will result in gives them money that they can use for the actual construction of the housing units.
Can I just ask you, the school districts in the Bay Area that you've heard about that have started kind of building teacher housing, I think Palo Alto, Mountain View, I think there are a couple in the East Bay. Have they seen success really in terms of attracting teachers?
Yes, the Jefferson Elementary Union School District has just recently, in the last several months, launched a brand new project in San Jose. There have been many projects, some in the pre-K through 12 space, a lot in higher education. There is tremendous interest. Today we heard from the West Contra Costa Unified School District and their desire. Oakland Unified has been involved. So we know that there's interest in the Bay Area and certainly throughout the state of California.
All right, we'll see if this bill passes in the months ahead. But Superintendent Tony Thurman, I want to move on to a few other things. Of course, people are talking about the mass layoffs at the Department of Education. Many are asking, how exactly does that affect local schools, right? Whether it's K through 12 or the universities. I think in order to understand that, we first have to get exactly what does the Department of Education do on a federal level.
Yeah, great question. Think of it this way. The Department of Education administers funding for special education services, funding to help low-income students, including homeless students, a lot of specialized programs there, as well as grants for students to go to college. And so this is sending the most destructive signal that the president and his administration would just dismiss half of the department. Means that this is a threat to special education and to funding for those who are going to college. And I think that people in the Bay Area need to reach out to the members of Congress and say, hey, we want special education to be protected. These actions that the president is taking, he's making these executive orders to try and dismantle the Department of Education. That requires action from Congress. And so we really want to urge your followers to reach out to their elected officials in Congress to say, we want you to stand with us and to protect the U.S. Department of Education.
Right, because that's funding Congress has already approved and designated for those purposes. But let me ask you also, you heard that soundbite from President Trump when he talks about wanting to return education to the states. Some people may be wondering what that means, because isn't curriculum already determined by local school boards?
It's absolutely correct. And when the president says return education to the states, he's sending a message. He's hiding. He's saying that he doesn't want the federal government to fund programs like special education. As it stands now, California sends more money to the federal government than we actually get for programs like special education. And so he is trying to shirk his duties and his responsibilities to make sure that the federal government provides adequate funding for California and for all states. And we have to hold the president and his administration to account and to say, fully fund special education. Don't attack kids with disabilities. Make sure they get access.
Look, even before this move, so many Bay Area school districts have been sending out layoff notices lately due to massive budget deficits. San Francisco Unified is looking at $113 million. Oakland, about $95 million. Look, historically, is this the worst you've seen it? And why are these districts so broke?
Worst I've seen from the federal government. And those districts are broke because our system is based on average daily attendance, and that's how schools get revenue. Our population has been declining and attendance has been declining, and that means less revenue for our schools. What the president is doing is a smack in the face to the school districts. They have to lay folks off because they don't have the money. The U.S. Department of Education is funded by Congress. And here, the president is cutting these programs and laying staff off with no notice. Some think he's trying to do this so he can give a tax break to wealthy Americans. And we think that's wrong. Don't do that on the backs of education of California kids or anywhere in the nation.
All right. If you'll allow me one more question here. You've been speaking as the state school superintendent, but I want to also ask you a question as a gubernatorial candidate next year when Governor Newsom will be termed out. It's a crowded Democratic field. Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, former Congresswoman Katie Porter, Attorney General Rob Bonta. Bonta has said he would drop out if former Vice President Kamala Harris jumped in, calling her field clearing as a candidate. Would you likely leave the race if she entered? Do you feel the same?
I don't want to get into a lot of political conversation because I'm here in the State Department of Education. All I can say is that I have enjoyed serving for 17 years the people of the state. And as I come to the end of my term, I'd like to continue doing the work that we do on education, making sure that our kids learn how to read, making sure that they're ready for great jobs. And so that's where my focus is. I'm happy to discuss with you the campaign in a more direct way when I'm not at the department, but I love being a public servant. The people have given me a chance to serve, and I hope to continue serving for many years to come.
Darn it, I did forget that you are at the state office, and of course from there you cannot speak about campaigning matters. Sorry about that, and thank you so much for coming on today to talk about these important issues.